It's been months now that the 12 apostles have been on the road with Jesus. And if there's anything they can say about following Jesus after all this time, it is this: discipleship is hard. Jesus is on his way to Jerusalem now, on his way to the cross. And lately, he's been the most honest he has ever been with the apostles about the cost of following him. To be Jesus' disciple, you have to sell your possessions, leave your family behind, and follow him. You have to take up your cross, the instrument of state-sponsored execution, and follow him. And Jesus has just been teaching about forgiveness. He says, if another disciple sins, you must rebuke the offender. And if they repent, you must forgive them. Even if the same person sins against you 7 times a day and repents 7 times, you must forgive them. The apostles are thinking what we might be thinking right now. I don't have enough faith for that. My faith is not strong enough to give up everything I own and walk away from my family and face death and, forgive someone over and over again for the same thing. This business of following Jesus is incredibly difficult. It takes more faith than I've got. So give me more faith, Jesus. Increase my faith. The apostles seem to be thinking of faith as something you can measure. If I'm going to follow you, Jesus, I'm going to need 3 more pounds of faith. By volume, that's 1.5 gallons of faith. Jesus replies with one of those infuriating sayings he seems to whip out all the time. If you had faith the size of a mustard seed, you could say to this mulberry tree, "Be uprooted and planted in the sea," and it would obey you. Mustard seeds are tiny. They're smaller than a pinhead. That's all the faith we need to move a mulberry tree? A tree that can grow to 60 feet tall? Really, Jesus? A mustard seed of faith? It might help the apostles and us to back up a few steps and ask, what is faith? When I've asked this question, most people will answer that faith is belief. Faith is what we say in the creeds. It is agreeing with a set of propositions that can't really be proved. We just have to accept them. We might have learned this from the powerful words of the letter to the Hebrews. Faith is the assurance of things hoped for, the conviction of things not seen. But that's only one definition of faith, and I'd say it's a limited definition. There are other ways to understand faith. For Jesus, faith is not something you have. Faith is something you do. Jesus would say that faith isn't belief, it is action. Faith is the way you live out what Jesus asks of you. The definition of faith that resonates the most deeply for me has to do with the heart. Faith is where you give your heart. Faith is loyalty, trust, relationship. The faith I have in my friend has nothing to do with intellectual propositions about them. I've given my heart to this person. I'm loyal to them. I'm in relationship with them. Maybe faith in Jesus is having a relationship with Jesus, giving our hearts and loyalty to Jesus, being friends with Jesus. This kind of faith cannot be measured, but it's no less real. We have faith because we are in relationship. And with loyalty, trust, relationship, a tiny bit of faith is enough. Faith the size of a mustard seed is all you need, because that keeps the relationship going. Little is known about the prophet Habakkuk. He was probably active about 600 years before the birth of Jesus, when the power of the Babylonian Empire was at its height and the Jewish kingdom of Judah was at its most vulnerable. It doesn't take a prophet to see that Judah is about to be conquered. Habakkuk and everyone else in Judah knows the catastrophe has already started. Babylon has begun sending captured Jewish leaders into exile, and it is only going to get worse. These are times that try people's souls, when no matter how much faith you have, it seems like it's never enough. Habakkuk shouts to God, "Help us! Do something! I cry to you for help. I witness lawlessness and injustice, and you don't seem to listen. The wicked are triumphing in Judah while the righteous are in retreat. Do you care what's happening to us?" We might think that God would take Habakkuk's cries as the opposite of faith. Habakkuk has no assurance of things hoped for. But Habakkuk does have a smidgen of a relationship with God. It's the size of a mustard seed. And that tiny bit of faith allows him to argue with God. That argument keeps the relationship going. Habakkuk is willing to wait for God to answer. And God does. God says, "Write this down on tablets. Make the letters big and clear so that people running past will be able to read them." I still have a vision for Judah. It does not lie. If it seems to be late, wait for it. It will come. I will bring justice in my good time. Hold on to that, Habakkuk, people of Judah. I'm still here. That mustard seed of faith, that tiny bit of relationship with God, is enough to keep Habakkuk and his people going through the worst years of their lives. Judah is conquered. Babylon destroys Jerusalem and its temple, blinds the king, kills the rest of the royal family, and sends most of Judah into exile. For 45 years, the exiles draw on that smidgen of faith to cry out to God in grief and to argue and plead with God. And then the Babylonian Empire collapses, and the exiles are allowed to go home. Judah receives justice for its suffering at Babylon's hands. God's vision did not lie. God did bring justice in God's good time. And that memory of God setting them free continues to sustain the Jewish people for hundreds of years. Their faith, their loyalty to God, their trust in God, their relationship with God saves them. Jesus might have been exaggerating about a tiny bit of faith uprooting a mulberry tree. He does tend to embroider his metaphors for effect. But he is on to something, that a mustard seed of faith is enough to follow him, to do what he asks of us. When I was growing up in the 1980s, there were a few examples of faith stronger than Mother Teresa. This petite nun from Albania went to the slums of Calcutta to serve the poorest of the poor, the people shunned and rejected by society. She founded hospices where Muslims, Hindus, and Christians could die with dignity according to their faith. She personally cared for people suffering from leprosy and AIDS. She opened homes for orphans and homeless youth. She traveled to places torn by war and famine to feed refugees and survivors. When Mother Teresa was awarded the 1979 Nobel Peace Prize, she was so dedicated to her work that she refused to attend the award banquet. Instead, she asked that the cost of the dinner be donated to the poor in India. By the time she died in 1997, the Missionaries of Charity, the order of nuns she founded, was operating hundreds of hospices, orphanages, missions, and schools worldwide. 10 years after she died, in 2007, Mother Teresa's letters were published. She'd asked for these letters to be destroyed after her death. She wrote them thinking that no one but her correspondents would ever see them. And the letters revealed that for nearly all her adult life, As Mother Teresa was founding hospices and feeding the starving and caring for orphans, she was enduring profound spiritual emptiness. She wrote to a spiritual advisor, "Such deep longing for God and repulsed, empty, no faith, no love, no zeal. The saving of souls holds no attraction. Heaven means nothing. Pray for me, please, that I keep smiling at him in spite of everything." At times, Mother Teresa doubted the existence of God. And yet, she kept on praying, talking to God, crying out for help. She kept up her side of her relationship with God. Her faith seemed so small and insignificant to her, it might as well have been the size of a mustard seed. And look what she was able to accomplish. She got the world to notice the poorest of the poor and to see the face of Jesus in them. Sounds like uprooting a mulberry tree to me. Discipleship is hard, and we may well feel that we don't have enough faith to do what Jesus asks of us. But all it takes is a mustard seed of faith, a little bit of trust and loyalty that allows us to keep up a relationship with God. Even when it seems that God is absent, continuing to pray, continuing to talk to God is enough. That relationship with God sustains us through whatever catastrophe and spiritual emptiness we might face. With God, a mustard seed of faith is enough to uproot a mulberry tree and hurl it into the sea. For with God, all things are possible.